his startup life and how it's changed and where we are now. And I think there's a real value to being able to really look back and see, you know, where the trajectory over the last 20 years. So without further ado, thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Chantal. Thank you. And I'm going to put my coffee over here.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Out of the shot. All right. So this is also an experiment. This is the first live stream from the studio's Facebook page. Is that correct?
Second.
Second. Okay. Congrats. I thought I was going to be the first. Hi, everybody. I am pretty humbled to be standing in front of you today. So I'm going to try and give you some ideas, some insights, hopefully some questions, powerful questions for you to also go and work on today about entrepreneurship, about innovation, also perhaps a little bit about history, because I think the last 20 years has been such a crucible of methods of working, of how people how relationships operate, how we create new things, how we sell those things, and also a huge amount of change in the world. And I've been very, very lucky to be exposed to a whole lot of different worlds during that time. So 3 acts. I thought I would come with a classic story, narrative design, and that way sort of structure my chat today. The first act I want to talk about was really general about my first encounters with entrepreneurship, with how people are trying to create new things, and also this sort of quicksilver that runs through a group of people who are engaged with some exciting project or solving a problem or creating something new. The second act I wanted to talk about was where I got into more, I learned a lot through a career I had, nearly 16-year career I had in the marketing industry, marketing and technology, and the things that I learned from, let's call it traditional storytelling or traditional marketing, and how that then catapulted me into the third act, which was where I became a true entrepreneur, failed, lost everything, picked myself up, and then was able to learn some more stuff along the way. And you know, maybe one day I'll be able to buy a house. We'll see. So first act, my first encounters with entrepreneurship. So I was originally an academic. That wasn't my passion. My passion was originally to be an astronaut. And I decided to go down the Neil Armstrong track. So I did aerospace engineering, I did science, I ended up following a girl to London, so I found myself in Imperial College in London. And all the way through, I'd also had this kind of passion for 3D graphics and telling stories on computers. And in those days, you know, we had this computer called the BBC Micro that came out that, you know, even an 11 or a 12-year-old could program and create a little kind of computer story. So I had this sort of weird thing going on where I had this engineering mindset and also had this storytelling mindset. And so when I came to London, there was this tension, and I was asked, because of my computer work and so on, I was asked to do a PhD there, which was a job basically with a PhD attached, form of brain cancer actually. But I decided, okay, well this is good. I can follow that Neil Armstrong track, and maybe I can jump into the astronaut program that way. And then along the way, I had a lot of other experiences that were completely orthogonal to this sort of track. You know, get the degree, get the papers published, do all that sort of formal stuff to get yourself a job in NASA. And meanwhile, I was being drawn into things like yacht racing in the university, where I met a completely different group of people, and I was exposed to marketing. And I was exposed to marketing because we had to raise money for the yacht racing. So I had these two worlds, which is actually quite classic about entrepreneurship, because you're often finding yourself straddling multiple worlds. I had these two worlds, science and deep technology, and it was kind of, I have to say, very dry. And I sort of struggled with my dream and the reality of this sort of world of research and this world of raising money, marketing, and actually sailing yachts and leading teams of people to go out in the ocean and compete. And then what happened was, and again, another classic entrepreneurial thing, suddenly, out of the blue, an opportunity came to present a BBC documentary, actually write and present a BBC documentary. And so the university put me forward as a candidate, and after about 5 interviews, they picked me. So all those worlds kind of collapsed, and I went into this 6-month, effectively, it was almost like an internship. It was a secondment to the BBC, and I had to write a 1-hour special on the arts-science divide and how it was in the UK. Because in the UK at that stage they had a really strong, and I think they still do, really strong separation between art and science. And so I got to interview on camera Douglas Adams, Craig Charles from Red Dwarf, a bunch of ministers, and then go through the editing process, which was also my first exposure to one of the BBC's first ever non-linear editing systems, which we all take for granted now. And so I had this exposure to the world of television and storytelling on screen, and visual storytelling. And I had this moment of crisis where I left the BBC film crew that I'd been travelling around the UK on. BBC producer on the back of my motorcycle turning up, and then a BBC film crew would turn up, and then we'd do a piece to camera in Leicester Square, this kind of crazy kind of rock and roll thing. And then I stepped out of that world back into the world of research. And I found that it was suddenly, I sort of had this lens that world of research, in particular space and engineering at that stage, was incredibly male, pale and stale. It was incredibly kind of narrow in its thinking. People really couldn't really tell a story. They could talk about the Euler equations, they could talk about Navier-Stokes, direct simulation, Monte Carlo, hypersonic aerodynamics, rah, rah, rah. Then I realised that BBC film crew, they can kind of talk about this kind of stuff too, and they also know which celebrity to put into Death Valley to do the piece of camera to the audience. So there was this sort of moment of crisis for me where my whole life had been, an arrow towards how do I become an astronaut, and yet the people in the BBC, the film crew even in the BBC, were these sort of 360-degree Renaissance people who had a hustle about them, who had a let's get this done, let's get this in the can. We're going to try and smash this piece of camera. Let's not get permission from British Rail. Just go and do that thing on the train station, and we'll smash and grab, right? This is being recorded, right? Yeah. So I'm sure the statute of limitations has run out. So that was a kind of a fulcrum moment of entrepreneurship for me, to see how the BBC folks approach things versus how the research people approach things. So coming out of that whole research world, at that stage, the internet was starting. It's just this little thing, tiny little thing. Most people didn't have an internet connection. Most computers didn't have an internet browser. But I had also been exposed to that because I'd been in this academic environment where we had great internet. We saw all the first internet browsers. We saw all this sort of stuff. I always think back to that and think, why the hell didn't I reserve Coke.com or Apple.com or something back in the day? But that also had this quicksilver of entrepreneurship running through it. And so I made a decision to, instead of go and work for British Aerospace or go and try and get a job in NASA, etc., to actually see if I could find a way to break into that world, because it had that entrepreneurial thing, and leave my dreams behind because actually I was not inspired by the people I was meeting, and go into this new world. And so the first real entrepreneurial enterprise I joined was a company in Double Bay, in a bedroom of the co-founder, called Spike Wireless. And they didn't even have a proper office. But what was happening with them is that they were riding this incredible wave. And so within about 3 days of joining that company and starting to work in the bedroom of the co-founder, Ruby, literally we'd be in the boardroom of major banks, or we'd be in the boardroom of like Toyota, explaining the internet, explaining web design. And the unique thing about that business, and one of the reasons I joined them, was that they would start with design. They would start with crafting visual design, and they were a firm that was actually founded by writers and graphic designers, not technology people. And my job was to take their designs and bend the technology to make it faithfully express the design. And so as a technologist in this sort of creative environment, I was exposed to that creative sensibility. And that was it was an entrepreneurial company in the sense that they were really trying to build a completely new product for an audience that didn't even understand the product. They weren't sure what it was going to do for them. There were all a set of experiments across the board on every level that this company was trying to run. So that was kind of my first entrepreneurial sort of experience, and stabbed me in the heart. Kind of, I wasn't able to really work in a different way. Really, after that, I felt like I had to be involved in something that was trying to push back frontiers. So fast forward, I had an opportunity in that industry, internet marketing and media. I had the opportunity to work in Japan, work for an American company. I even ran a big team here in Sydney. We had about 30 staff. I was way out of my depth, promoted way past my abilities as a business person, as was the classic .com period around 1999, 2000. You'd be put in great, you're the managing director, fine. And I'd be like, I have no idea about tax, no idea about employment law, no, nothing, right? Like, and even those companies were really used to an up market. They'd never been in a down market. So in terms of really dealing with all sorts of things like accountability and developing people and so on, we didn't really have much knowledge. It was just figure it out. But the one thing we did have was this entrepreneurial culture, digital entrepreneurial culture of horizontal structures. We didn't have a strong hierarchical culture. We had quite an open, transparent culture, sometimes too transparent, and quite compassionate, we felt, because we were trying to create a new world in 2000. And then we all got .com, because some of you may remember, those of you who are born in the 20th century may remember going through the .com period. And the lights kind of went out. Suddenly we were all ejected from these businesses. It all collapsed. And I had to go through, for example, a deed of company arrangement process with the Australian component of a US company, and really work with all sorts of people I'd never encountered before. I think Prentice Parbury Gorilla, who's a company that specializes in helping businesses wrap up. That whole thing, that was like, oh my gosh. And the emotions of that, like I have stood in front of a whole room of staff, told them what was happening, and then, burst into tears. I've done that as a leader. And that was a real sort of, so we all, I think in that sector, that .com sector, we all kind of pulled in our horns between sort of 2001 and 2006. And we all just sort of created different kind of businesses. So the business I created after that was not a startup, it was a services company. And so this is the end of the first act. The arc, can you see the arc? How it went up, and then massive .com, and then crash. And so out of that, we all basically, there was still a need for design, there was still a need for websites, there was still a need for people to create images of themselves online, even brands in some cases. And so we went right down into almost cottage industry mode, but we weren't really startups, because by that stage people understood what a website was, they understood what an email signature was, they understood that business was heading towards e-commerce. So really we weren't really running massive experiments in new business models. We were really servicing customers in a more traditional way. So it wasn't super entrepreneurial, it was like, let's just survive. So second act begins with the birth of my second child, at which point it just became too hard to survive. And my wife and I had been working together. She's a creative director, I was a technology and salesperson. So I got out, got myself a job in the marketing sector, and at that stage, the industry, the digital industry, the more formal, larger scale digital industry was starting to get to grips with online advertising, which swept through that media sector. Over the next few years, in a series of agencies, I came up with this notion through a friend of mine of trying to get to the front of the marketing business. How could I get to where the most value is created, or at least the position where I can see what's coming? Because I'd worked in placing media for lots of different companies, big global companies, small ones, across, but you would kind of get this brief from, let's say, Cupertino, from like Apple's agency, for example, and would say, well, here's the creative, and these are the things you're allowed to do to it, but don't touch this, like no real creation, just kind of wrangling. And then that would be placed on media, and you think, well, that wasn't really that satisfying, I didn't really create very much value, I felt. So whereas I felt maybe there's something else, and so over a few different moves, I found myself eventually to a branding agency. And in the branding agency, I came to understand these concepts of positioning a brand, positioning a concept, positioning a product within a marketplace. and how you can respond to social changes, you can respond to commercial changes, you can respond to customer tastes. And in fact, this idea that marketing was not just yelling, actually it was as much about listening and trying to understand what people were saying to you. So that agency, which no longer exists now sadly, but that agency, the One Centre, did some terrific research in trying to understand what customers were interested in, and then designed campaigns and programs to try to activate the customers' excitement and interest. And we did things like launch the Audi TT in Australia. We launched a new orange juice from McDonald's, and when you open up your Big Mac, the writing inside came from our agency. You know, those kind of very simple ideas about looking at someone sitting down in a McDonald's. What do? They open their burger and then they look at it, and there's no writing, there's no message, there's no, guess what? We have an amazing supply chain. It's all Australian, etc., etc. So those kinds of innovations, this idea of experimenting with customers, I started to be exposed to that at that stage. I also, this idea that you could create something new, you could actually go out in the world, create a new product or a new service and put it into the marketplace and see if people wanted to buy it. So I got very excited about that, and I thought that was amazing. And so I decided to start my own business, and I had this notion, this was sort of a notion that it needed to be something in media. I wanted to do something back in the screen media industry or something in the media communications industry. So we tried a number of different models, and then I locked in on one, and I found a co-founder who was very kind of plugged in the music industry. And so we had this idea, let's do this thing, crowdfunding. Maybe it's going to take off, so let's try out this idea called crowdfunding. And we then almost, and this is another classic entrepreneurial story, I'd had all this learning through branding, I'd had all these years of experience, and then it was as if when I started my own company, all that disappeared, and I kind of blanked my brain. And so what we ended up doing was pitching our idea to a whole lot of different people, and we got some investment, and we kept pitching it, and everyone said, this is a fantastic idea, this is great, you should go and do it, it's going to be awesome, well done, well done. And yet we didn't run many experiments, I think maybe almost no experiments with our customers. We didn't create an MVP, like a really simple proof of concept, and put it in front of the actual customer, who might have been a band who wanted to raise money for the next album, or might have been a studio or a record label who wanted to try and test out the appetite for a particular kind of music. We didn't do any of that stuff. We kind of got sucked into, and it's a trap, right, for young players, sucked into almost the notion that we're doing this cool startup, everyone thinks that our idea is great, how clever are we? And look at this giant world that we can see through the lens of our startup. When I look at the world through the lens of my startup, oh, wow, I can see Spotify in the distance, even though it didn't exist then. I can see how amazing this is going to be, and we're going to be absolute heroes. And so we powered on in all sorts of ways, and then increasingly freaking out that we actually weren't getting anywhere, getting any traction, and didn't even understand that was a problem. Like, didn't really have the language. I hadn't had the wisdom to get myself a mentor to slap me around the face on a regular basis. And I'd also got myself investors who were excited about the business but didn't have any knowledge of that industry. And so tried to help in various ways, but none of us were really effective. And then 2008 happened at the GFC. And so all of the investors and someone who had wanted to put money in, that all disappeared overnight. I think it was around Christmas time. So we wrapped up the office to prepare to go on Christmas, and then when we came back from our Christmas holidays, gone, everything gone. So I found myself, this sort of second act, the second arc, I found myself standing on the street. I have a PhD in aerospace engineering, I had 15 years of marketing, working all over the world, I had companies underneath me, employing loads of people. I found myself standing in the street with 2 kids and not even enough money to buy milk at the end of that journey, owing probably a couple of $100,000, and this realization of the amount of hubris and the amount of I'd sold this vision to everyone, including my family, including myself, and the sort of incredible arrogance I realised of going down that path. And so this is also a trap in entrepreneurialism, is that you can get caught up in your idea, especially if you're not ground truthing it in customers in quite a humble way, and actually trying to create a real roadmap of business milestones that you can build on. We hadn't done any of those things. And so my response was to realise, I didn't have any money, so I had to borrow a little bit of money from my old elderly parents, right? Which is the most embarrassing thing you can do when you're the golden child son who's done all these academic things supposedly, and just scramble. And so I did a bunch of different jobs. I helped to run a bookshop in the University of Sydney. I consulted to various people, helped Blurb.com do some marketing and market penetration in Australia. And then I also stood up I was invited to, and I grabbed it, to run a 10-week entrepreneurship course, specifically around mobile technology, but really mobile and apps. And this was pre-iPhone, right? This is pre-iPhone. iPhone was right there, about to happen. And so I threw that together, and it turns out that I was like the broken teacher. Like there's this archetype you may or may not have heard of, which is the best teachers are sometimes people who are broken. So I felt like I had enough sort of stripes of wounds and realizations of the stupid mistakes that I'd made, that I could share that with this cohort. And I invited a lot of mentors in, and in a classic pattern that you see a lot now in accelerators, we created an accelerator program funded by the federal government, administered by the South Australian government. It was a really kind of interesting, convoluted thing. It was called Mega, and we ran a cohort of startups through that, and young entrepreneurs, really. And we did it in UTS, up in the 10th floor, once a week, and learnt it as we go. And every week I would kind of create the next module and bring in people and so on. So out of that, I got a chance to really examine entrepreneurship as a discipline, as a professional discipline, and the steps that you need to go through. And again, advise companies. And I also discovered this amazing thing you get when you are a mentor, which is you get this thing called the inspectorial superpower, which is because you're not involved in that business, you're able to see things or call on your knowledge and experience in a much easier way, because you can see their context, but you're not in their harm's way. And so I realized that was a great thing that I could offer. And the feedback I got when I gave people my opinion, I always try and say, look, this is my opinion, please ignore it if you disagree, but I feel like this, and this, what do you think? People would respond to that, they would take action, and then down the line they said, that was really good, that was really critical. So I was like, okay, well maybe I don't suck as a human being so much after all. Maybe this is a good thing I can do. Around that stage, the media world, also I had been running an event called Mobile Monday Sydney, because another of the weaknesses that I recognise I have is I'm terrible at cold calling, I'm terrible at new business. I really find it difficult still just breaking into an organisation. So I created an event to draw people to me instead, and that was Mobile Monday Sydney, which ended up running for about 8 years. And out of that, I was invited, I was given a job offer, and the job offer was to join QuickFlix. And the reason I was interested in joining QuickFlix was because I felt that of all the companies in Australia, they were the closest to being able to jump to a subscription video on demand model, which was something that I was interested in. I was interested in the technology. I thought, yes, we should be watching, we shouldn't have these silly DVDs, we should be streaming it online. That would have been a dream of all of ours. And so that the opportunity, and I was right, QuickFlix, which had a huge DVD library, which meant they had a huge digital archive of metadata for that huge DVD library, were wanting to go down that path. And so I moved my family to WA, and I was very lucky to be part of the team that delivered the first real Hollywood-grade SVOD service in Australia and New Zealand. And then after that, that catapulted me into another corporate role at MI9 Channel 9, where I was very lucky to lead a team, and as well as support some leaders in that team and develop second screen apps for Channel 9 and a new CMS for that, so that they could build a television show supporting sites with no engineers. Just the account managers could completely create like 360 room reveals and surveys and all sorts of other multi-camera events and real live tweeting events without any developers involved, which is pretty profound, we thought. And again, all trying to support digital storytelling. And so in those roles at QuickFlix and then MI9, I tried to hold on to that entrepreneurial discipline of trying new things, trying to make sure that we were experimenting with customers and taking advice from my team as much as I could, as much as being a leader and integrating that. But also I was exposed to that corporate world, of, right, how do I manage budgets, P&Ls, how do I deal with the internal politics of organisations, the chairman, the CEO, my team, and brokering the differences between all those folks. This was really lots of product roles. Even though I was a CTO, I found that a lot of the time I was in a kind of a product role, which is, I know a lot of you are in, where you're trying to integrate a customer experience with content, technology, business proposition, a subscription or an acquisition pathway, etc. So lots of complexity there. And so at the end of the second act, at the end of my corporate life with MI9, Channel 9 and Microsoft decided to demerge, and I was shaken out as one of the middle managers. My role at MI9 was head of product innovation, so I was shaken out as part of that demerger. And so I found myself at the beginning of the third act now. I found myself again out in the wild, although with a little bit more runway from that corporate experience. So I had this academic experience going into .com entrepreneurship in Act 1. In Act 2, I had really a marketing career, a brief sojourn that was a disaster in the world of startups, and then a corporate media tech career. And I got to see all the stresses and strains that are on the media industry and big media. For example, MI9, they had a $100 million turnover, which you go, whoa, those rich fat cats, they must have been great. And I was like, no, it was very scary because just a small percentage change in their revenues and a whole bunch of people have to get cut, right? Or that trend over 12 months or 18 months can drive massive sort of swathes through that business. And so the culture inside that organization become really, really freaked out because it doesn't feel safe anymore. So anyway, third act, so I found myself with a bit of runway, and I was invited to join a really exciting startup. And at the same time, I was also starting to detect an opportunity to go back to the space industry and also to go into what we call deep tech entrepreneurship, which I think a number of you, for example, in VR and AR, a number of you are actually experiencing, I think, an element of this deep tech entrepreneurship, which is where hardware and software has to come together. So the big startup opportunity I had the dream opportunity to join was to be part of the founding team of iFlix, or at least a founding staff member of iFlix. And iFlix was an opportunity to build an SVOD platform. Yes, kind of inspired by Netflix, but not. An SVOD platform for the emerging economies, which comprises about 4 billion people. And in most of those economies, Hollywood got zero revenues from any of its products. Just piracy was the main way people got content. And it was a very exciting proposition. So I got to hire the CTO, I got to set a technology direction, I got to work on ingesting 10,000 hours of content. I also got to have my butt kicked, for in a big organisation, something, especially one that's growing very fast. So much is happening around you that sometimes you're just dealing with what's going on around you and not taking action to change the parameters that you're dealing with. And so one of the situations I came across at iFlix was that we had a really tight deadline to ingest about 8,000 hours of content, and I had hired a company to help us do that, and just the laws of physics meant they were not going to make it. And I was kind of watching this happen in slow motion, and thank God our CEO, who's a terrific Mark Brett, who's a terrific kind of leader and human being, I was able to sort of say, hey, primary school mathematician would understand that you're not going to make this deadline. Do something, change the dynamic, break some rules here. Don't just let this play out. And so again, I kind of realized entrepreneurialism is something that this quicksilver is something that you can lose track of. You can let it run away, and you can find yourself in a comfortable little spot thinking, great, I can just pause here for a minute. And in fact, the thing that you are working on could go wrong just because you're not saying, okay, I need a little bit more healthy paranoia about whether this is going to last. And am I trying hard enough to change the rules? What's the hack I need to run here? So thanks to that kick in the pants, I was able to run a hack and hire and change the number of suppliers and a whole range of different things that are obviously common sense in hindsight, but at the stage I was like deer in the headlights. Managed to resolve that and then overshot, hit the target, and then that was a sort of an entrepreneurial breakthrough, which was watch out for your own mindset. Watch out for when you've got a plan and you're like, right, we're just going to execute this plan, we're just going to turn the handle on the plan, and then you're not watching the plan go off the cliff. Right? That's a really, really important thing, is that be prepared, be wise enough to know that no plan survives contact with the enemy, and be ready to change that plan. And also the other thing that I learned during that period was there is no right way. So when people sort of come to you and say, you should have known, why didn't you, it's like there's no right way. All you really can do is just be aware that make a plan and then check that it's working, and check that it's going to deliver the outcome. And if it's not, change the thing, right? Actually get in there and change it. Your job is not done. And that was something that I continually have to learn and continue to have to watch myself for. So anyway, that experience of working with iFlix exposed me to the world, the larger world outside of our, here I am, white male, Anglo-Saxon, English speaker, the world that I purportedly know is North America, Europe. Actually, there's this much larger world. Pakistan, 180 million people. Indonesia, 360 million people. Telecom Indonesia has 100 million subscribers. In the Philippines, you've got a huge country, 50 million people, pretty much surviving on less than $10 a day. Nigeria, 180 million people, etc. So MENA, ASEAN, West Africa, East Africa, these places, huge populations. And guess what? They have mobile phones. And guess what? They watch the same internet memes that we watch. And so in iFlix, I had these extraordinary moments where you might have this cool DJ in Manila who might be working on content ingestion, and a customer service rep in Cairo who's a female wearing a hijab, and they're sharing memes across Slack because that's the internet. So that was beautiful. And the other thing that I also learned at iFlix was that Australian culture and our exposure to so many different cultures and our openness to so many different cultures actually gives us a big advantage, and that we can glue together lots of different people from lots of cultures. And so we really have to start to look at these areas, ASEAN, MENA, as our backyard, as places where we're going to be welcomed, as places where a lot of the leaders went to university in Australia. I've been in a meeting with Malaysian government officials and discovered one of them was a Collingwood supporter because he'd gone to University of Melbourne. And so there's a lot of the senior people now who are Gen X mostly have studied overseas, have gone to Australia on holidays. So as an Australian, when you turn up, it's like, oh great, you're an Aussie. We missed you guys. So we actually have to be opening businesses in these markets, buying companies, partnering with people in these companies, in these markets, because of the scale, and actually thinking about the blue ocean that still exists in a lot of these places for all sorts of different media opportunities. I haven't even mentioned China or India, which iFlix has avoided because those things are so red already. Certainly iFlix wasn't interested in Australia, North America, Singapore, Korea, Japan, all those markets. All the media rights are incredibly expensive. They're incredibly red markets, as in there's lots of other players, there's lots of people to compete with. Whereas across Philippines, Malaysia, Myanmar, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, all these other countries, Dubai, Cairo, Egypt, all these places, there was not the service. You couldn't get, Iron Man on a phone. You couldn't watch Star Wars through a streaming platform. So we were able to do all of that. And my role at iFlix was also to help iFlix fill out their Hollywood studio questionnaire. So I was exposed to a lot of the technology and the thinking behind Hollywood, and I was able to discover that a lot of it is like 10, 15 years old, and they're still struggling to catch up with the bleeding edge. And I know a number of you, as I said, are doing things with VR, AR, or in new forms of nonlinear storytelling, and they're really starting to try to understand that. And so they're actually very interested in startups in media tech, because their current business models, they don't see a future. They don't see they're going to be their main game, and so they're starting to get ready to run experiments with folks like you. Anyway, iFlix was this amazing journey. It also created an opportunity for me to be exposed to that wider world, and at the same time, Elon Musk had started to fly SpaceX rockets. We already had Richard Branson doing things in space. We had Blue Origin from Jeff Bezos. So we suddenly had this digital culture coming into the space industry, and a collision between almost one of the most fixed cultures, which is around military tech and space tech, and this sort of virus of digital culture. And then this sudden recognition that if you were a young engineer, male or female, and you joined a really cool sounding company, like Lockheed Martin or Boeing or Airbus and so on, after a couple of years you'd be like, get me the hell out of here. I want to go and join a cool internet startup, because the culture in this place is terrible. And so these organizations, big aerospace defense companies, are all waking up to the fact that they can't retain the best and brightest because their cultures kind of suck. And also that the new generation of entrepreneurs are starting to eat away massively. So Elon's completely transformed the launch market, for example. And so a huge amount of people in those big companies is like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So that's kind of an exciting time, because it means you never let a crisis go to waste. It means a lot of people are now opening up to new things. So final part of the third act, which is a cliffhanger, of course, is I've been very privileged to work with a group of people and be invited to help lead a group of people in the Australian new space sector, and those companies have gone on. I was involved in some of them, not all of them, but raised a total of about $30 million in the last 18 months, mostly from Australian investors, which is incredible, because 3 years before, you don't even have the ability you have in media to just try and find a client. It's like you're just a nutcase out there in the wilderness. So those folks, the fact that they got their act together, created a runway, pitched, and managed to raise $30 million in the last 18 months across about 6 or 7 firms is extraordinary. So that's an example of deep tech entrepreneurship. And those companies are now going through this challenge of, okay, how do we build cultures that are going to scale? How do we build value propositions that we scale? Where's our exit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And lo and behold, the latest act over the last 12 months, I started my own firm, XLab, working in deep tech innovation and entrepreneurship. And we've been sucked into the agri-food sector, which in Australia is wanting to completely reinvent itself and embrace digital, embrace data, decisions, prediction, automation, and provenance, and try, because we export so much of our food, the food industry in Australia wants traceability now. A product that has traceability, like a barcode that then goes to a Chinese language mobile site, can typically get double the price in China compared to one that doesn't, because they're so scared of food counterfeiting. And so we're seeing this exciting thing happen through agri-food, which is a new generation coming in, people taking existing value chains, you cut the grain, you dehusk it, you send it to a miller, it gets turned into flour, it gets sent to a baker, that's an example of a value chain, ends up in Woolies. Those value chains, there's all this risk, hedging, and all these sort of prices that are set and so on. All that's about to be disrupted by things like blockchain and transparent sharing of data, this kind of stuff that's come out of the digital sector. And it's exciting to see how lots of organizations are trying to grapple with that. And the other interesting thing is that this is sort of a final note before we have a chat, because I'm giving you loads of starting points, is one of the first companies that I was working with in the space sector ended up raising all this money from people who are in the agri-food sector, because it's delivering that service from space was part of their value proposition, and the customer group was the agricultural sector. And who invested in them? The customer group. And so that was a beautiful validation for the fact that a lot of industries are now, you might think of them as verticals, but there's a lot of horizontal themes starting to cut through those industries. And a lot of the way that people are starting to think about customer about company life cycles or business life cycles, and how you can go from an idea to proving that your solution can fit a real customer's problem, to then proving that that customer will actually pay for that, right? Market solution fit, and then working out a model to scale. That's becoming mainstream, that idea. And sort of as a final note, entrepreneurship, which is fundamentally about trying to create products that people really want through a process of experimentation. Entrepreneurship is also coming of age at a time in the world when we have astonishing problems, like massive global problems. We have extraordinary technologies. We have a generational change, and the baby boomers are making way for a whole wave of suppressed Gen Xers, finally, and a lot of the Gen Xers are taking over and trying to bring in new values that they've learned from their kids and that millennials demand. We're also seeing this culture of how do we change things for the best, and we're seeing this really massive trend underneath all of it, which is all of the world's industries. Australia is in the vanguard of that, but all of the world's industries are evolving to run on flowing data. And so every single sector, if you take transport, it's now, I'm sure you used your Opal card to tap on, or you use Opal to plan your trip, or you use a GPS to find where you're going. Transport has become completely digital. You can't buy an airline ticket without really going online these days, unless you do a weird thing like turn up to the airport and say, sell me a ticket. It's pretty weird. If you've got a hotel room and it's not online, you're out of business. It has to be online. The hotel room has to be in some online platform. Finance industry has completely shifted to running completely off flowing data, and we're going to start seeing it in food. We're definitely seeing it in media. You get the theme. So these huge mega trends are a wonderful fabric on which to learn how to become great leaders, to learn how to become entrepreneurs, and it's a never-ending thing. You'll never become, in my view, an entrepreneur. You're constantly in a state of becoming, and learning, and I think every week I usually have some kind of emotional arc of, I really screwed that up. What can I learn? And figure out which questions to try to ask, rather than, okay, well, obviously I should have known that. So those are my 3 acts. What do you think? Did you watch the sequel?
Thank you, Tim. That was absolutely fantastic. And we should now, and there's many lessons to be learned for the studio, for myself. So I was taking notes, tweeting out some real gems there. So we'll open out to the audience. We don't have microphones because we don't. So who would like to ask a question? Has a question? Be shy.
So are you actually going to get to space?
Am I going to get to space? I hope so. I sure as hell hope so. Yes, I would love to, one way or the other. I believe that over the next 25 years we're going to see a huge amount of progress. So I'm hoping that, if I don't get run over in the street or something, I'll get that chance. I hope you do too. Yeah.
So there's another question there. No. Sorry, I don't have my glasses.
If you could distill that entire speech into one bit of advice in a sentence for budding entrepreneurs, what would it be?
I would say it would be a learner, not a knower. Come armed with powerful questions and work on questions. Don't question use your knowledge to ask great questions, and then people will want to collaborate with you. And if you come at it saying, I know this, obviously that, why don't you do what I say, then I think people won't want to collaborate with you, and then it'll be a lot harder for you to learn from your market and learn what your customers really want. And that's probably my best piece of advice, and that's what I try to work on every day. Sorry, that wasn't a question, but it's the one question where I have to come back with a statement of fact. Anyway.
Any other questions? Anna?
Amazing life story, no questions, but again, so much to take away and think
Thank you.
Can I ask a question from you? What was the one or two things that you thought resonated for you personally? Anyone want to kind of share something, a memory that I triggered for you, or something in my story?
Tim, I'd have to say it was that element of, that solution market fit, and just constantly, like, don't lose track of the prize, and just keep working. You get flat down, get up again, keep going. It's great. It's great to hear more of the story.
Asking for feedback, running customer experiments.
That's it.
It's really hard. It feels so theoretical. It feels, running customer experiments. Yeah, of course I should do that. But actually doing it is so tough. I mean, we have to learn that from you, Chantal. You put yourself out there in a heartbeat. But actually, you have to be humble enough to just say, stuff it. If I fall flat on my face, I'll just own that. And that's really hard. I think all of us find that really, really difficult. So it's fine. Doing a tweet is easy. Going out in the street and selling lemonade, that's hard. And a lot more of us should probably do that. Yeah.
And which is why I always come back to, I think filmmaking is a really great basis for entrepreneurism, because that's where I've come from. And being a documentary filmmaker, it's you're constantly on that entrepreneurial journey where you're out there in the world. You're constantly having to make choices, make decisions, and engage with the customer. And it's absolutely a very similar world to this world.
I think so. And a lot of you, are you working at the interface between, let's say, storytelling and the technical platform, a new platform? How many of you are doing that? Quite a few of you, yeah. So, you'll find that culture of engineers who want to have an answer. You want to provide an answer to a problem. But then the customer's like, it's kind of interesting, but actually I want that. And then the engineer's like, what that? So managing, as leaders or as entrepreneurs, managing the tension between those two worlds, which, we have for a long time had to wrangle the gear. We were setting up the cameras this morning. Am I standing in the right spot? Is the light in the right place? Making sure the technology is going to capture this place properly. And then turning around and saying, well, have I got anything useful to say? There's a tension between those two things, which is mirrored in entrepreneurship. There's a tension between your dreams of how you're going to change the world and the reality of the customers you're talking to right now. And one of the things, I think one of the most transformative learnings that I've had from a wonderful innovator, Jennifer Zanich, in running, last Christmas my firm ran the UNSW 10X Accelerator. She ran a session on hacking. And hacking, she doesn't mean hacking computers or hacking a technology. What she means is running a hack, which is a social hack, to change the dynamics that you have in your marketplace. So to remove barriers to getting to customers or attracting customers. And so that idea of how am I going to run, the customers are saying X, I'm not really that interested. But then I'm seeing them do Y over there. How do I get them to bring that behavior into this context? What's the hack I have to run? And that's also, I think, something. It's a problem-solving challenge when you land on set. And well, these were the photos that I got from the casting and location person. And when I arrived, it was totally different. What the hell am I going to do? And I have, $1 million worth of crew coming in to set up and everything. And that is entrepreneurship, where you sort of go, okay, I've got to think quickly, and also, okay, everybody, let's get in a circle. This is what we're trying to achieve. I'm up for ideas. Anyone, and how you can do that either as in your internal dialogue or with a group of people. I believe, sort of almost spiritually or ethically, gives you permission to continue to, grow and experiment. And when you're and you have to watch out for that mindset which comes in where it's like, where's the algorithm so I can just turn the handle on this? Which is to some extent how we were taught at school, how to pass exams. What's the way to pass that exam? What's the way to get through that gate? How do I get to the next screen? And that way of thinking, looking for a system or a structure is useful, but in a lot of situations it's not there. And so rather than falling in a heap, it's kind of what's the hack I have to run. These are kind of life skills, I think, for entrepreneurship that I unfortunately constantly have to keep learning, relearning, but they're things that I come back to. Hi.
Do you feel like kids, like I've got a 16-year-old, they're a mixture of that. They've got the creative thinking side, but it's very small. The education system seems to be squashing that and sending them down paths where it is rote learning back like we used to learn our times tables, but now it's like the exams are there, so just do as many past papers and you're guaranteed to have understood what the question is asking. And they're going through that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a larger question. I have a 15-year-old boy and an 11-year-old girl, and they're both different and they approach things differently. My 15-year-old certainly does not trust the system and is really looking now and scanning for how things are going to change. And he and his whole generation seem to be crowdsourcing all the time hacks and solutions and ways to get through things, and in a way that I never did when I was their age. So I'm in awe of my kids. I don't know, others, I can see other parents, I suspect, nodding. And I think that they are much more, we should give them a lot more credit for being street smart and savvy about the world, perhaps, than we do. I think they can see the turbulence that's coming. I think they can see that a lot of the structures that we might have relied on in the past, you know, uni, big company job, etc., they're just not reliable. And they've seen in my career how I've had that big comfortable job and then been shaken out, you know, in a restructure. So I think their perspective is it's all going to be up for grabs. And they seem, are your kids more entrepreneurial? Like, is yours?
Not much.
Yeah. Compared to how you were.
They hate the structure.
Yeah.
They, you know, when he went for his L's, he just went through and he said, oh, you know, I could read this book, I could just smash the test a few times. And so I'm just going to smash the test. And then looks and he goes, I'm watching what you do, I'm watching this, I'm watching that, and I'm just, YouTube's telling me this, I've got all these things. Don't worry, Dad, I've got this.
Yeah.
Mate, please just read the book.
Yeah, get out of my way, Dad. Yeah, just give me the keys. So, you know, that's probably another thing that I've done a lot of. I don't know about you guys. Do you think about your kids and their behaviour, or certainly young people if you don't have kids, and their behaviour with media to help guide you on what features or what things might be, you know, valuable in the marketplace? That's an example of, you know, I've certainly sat in corporate boardroom and said, well, this is what my kids are, and the other executives have looked at me and sort of said, you know what, this is what my kids do too. And so, you know, we make decisions about where to put the next $100 million sometimes based on what our selection of teenagers are doing. We're making the future, and we're incredibly lucky to be participating in that. And at the same time, we got to make a better future. What is that? So as long as we're saying what's the better future, I think I don't want to go on too much about it. Please cut me off because I may be boring you, but I often think a lot in advising SMEs as well as startups, because I'm doing increasingly helping businesses to re-pivot. I'm trying to figure out how to create cultures, or how to help leaders create cultures which can scale, but also scale in a compassionate way, in a way that drives safety, in a way that will drive high performance. And those things are things that I think are also going to go through the corporate world like wildfire. And I think you'll find yourselves as entrepreneurs increasingly being influential in those places, because they want that quicksilver. They want that, you know, ability to not only, okay, what's the hack, but also how do we create safety for this group? Okay, this person's not working out. It's not that they're a bad person. It's that they maybe I haven't recruited them for the right role. So I need to help them move to the next role. And these kinds of things, setting an example for that, and as entrepreneurs, by default, you're leaders, FYI, setting that example, and also going to your peers and saying, God, I'm feeling this emotion, I want to go crazy, I just want to do a Donald Trump and say, you're fired, and how should I handle this situation? And then just the fact that you're asking that question makes you, you know, very powerful and able to create a better outcome. So I think that multiple paragraph version of the answer to your original question, you know, is entrepreneurialism is actually to some extent about being a fully rounded human being who's trying to make a change, and trying to make sure that that change is sustainable. And I'm seeing that. I've given you a very thin slice. My personal take on a lot of this. Please go and talk to a whole bunch of other people, get a whole bunch of other opinions, and frame your own view of it. But it's, in my view, it's definitely about trying to make a change that people really want. And there's a death in that sometimes, because sometimes you have this vision of what your thing's going to be, and that's not what people want. And so you have to be strong enough to say, okay, well, all right, what should I give them now, and how would I build a pathway to where I want to go? And then often you discover a much better future than you could have imagined by, allowing yourself to be drawn by your customers in a particular direction and asking explicitly for that feedback. Burn it in to your products. How was it? I'm hoping you're sending a survey after this so you can tell me how badly I sucked, and then I can learn from that. And in all seriousness, how can you get feedback, real honest feedback, not just, yeah, it was great, thanks, it was terrific, but real 11:30 p.m. honesty, you were shit, you should have done this, you should have done that, real 11:30 p.m. honesty kind of feedback is kind of what you need, and then you don't be destroyed by it, so okay, what can I learn, what could I do better, and then sometimes it's something really unexpected.
Thank you. That's a great and we would actually like to do a survey, but we've been scrambling. So if everyone can leave their email on the way out, and we can send you the survey, that would be fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Team. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.